guys and girls. This is Kathleen Bradley, and you are listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson, along with our guest Mark Malkoff. Mark Malkoff, host of the award-winning Carson Podcast, and a man you've seen or heard on the Today Show, Good Morning America, and NPR's Weekend Edition. Mark's new book, Love Johnny Carson, one obsessive fan's journey to find the genius behind the legend, takes a deep dive into Johnny Carson's 30-year reign as host of The Tonight Show. Love Johnny Carson, available wherever books are sold through Dutton Books as well as Amazon.com. One of the things that Mark does in his books is that he divvies up the Johnny Carson Tonight Show era into like 3 or 4 sections. One section focuses mostly on the New York years, which was one of the most eye-opening parts for me, Mark, because I knew a little bit, and I knew some of the people he had on in New York. I did not know as much of the history and how significant the New York years were to him until I read your book.
There was a lot of questions on what went on during that 10 years because, as you know, NBC erased most of those 10 years. And I really wanted to paint a picture for the readers of the first show. Mel Brooks, was Johnny's first show and really let me in. He was backstage getting Groucho Marx autograph. Groucho was the surprise guest. And Mel talking about standing on Johnny's desk and making fun of Tony Bennett singing and Tony being there. And I just couldn't get over that Johnny's very first guest ever, Rudy Valley, who was promoting being on Broadway, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, his very first interview, somebody runs out of the audience onto the stage. And the show was done in real time. Johnny knew that this was going to get in, and he handled it beautifully. But it was this New York cabbie who was infamous named Stan Berman, and he's the one that infiltrated the Oscars and got arrested for being on stage with Bob Hope during the live telecast and gave him an Oscar. He was photographed at the Kennedy's inaugural. He snuck into the booth with Kennedy and got photographed with him and his family. And this is a guy who disguised himself with a fake beard to Johnny's first show and ran on stage, and Johnny dealt with it beautifully.
You mentioned the surprise guest. This is a recurring theme throughout the first section of Mark's book, which is in the early going, The Tonight Show was not a 90-minute show. It was an hour and 45 minutes. It was an hour 45-minute show because that was the length he inherited from Jack Paar when Johnny took over in '62, and that was the length Paar inherited from Steve Allen when Paar inherited The Tonight Show in 1957. But again, this goes to some of the canny, for lack of a better word, canny business savvy that I think Johnny had partially on his own, but this certainly came from wife number 2, Joanne, because of a quirk in the schedule and a quirk in the number of affiliates who carried the show from 11:15 to 11:30 versus those who only carried it from 11:30 onward. Technically, the host of the show had to make 2 appearances. He had to come on at 11:15 and then come on again at 11:30. Johnny didn't want to do that, and so that led to what was known for a while as the surprise guest segment.
Yeah, it was interesting because at the beginning, Johnny was doing the 2 monologues. He would do one which went to most of the country, and then a second one which went to the whole country. And they started, but slowly. There was a newspaper strike in New York. For whatever reasons, the news, they stopped in New York covering Johnny's first 15 minutes. And then in San Francisco, it was down to like maybe 30% of the NBC affiliates were showing those first 15 minutes. And Johnny just thought that was absolutely ridiculous, and he wouldn't come out of his dressing room. He would come out after 15 minutes and say, I had the 15-minute virus. That's what he said. And NBC said, we're going to hold Carson to his contract and all this. And Johnny ultimately won. That was definitely Joanne Carson. And then the 15 minutes were usually Ed McMahon and Skitch Henderson. The band might play But it was one of those things that Johnny did not have leverage. He did not even have a bathroom in his office at NBC. I mean, it took him a bunch of years for him to be able to get that. Even the carpeting, he asked for a rug, and they said absolutely not. He couldn't get a rug. It was Jerry Lester's leftover from when he was at NBC. So by the time about 64, 65, Johnny started getting power from NBC, and obviously by 1980 he gets ownership of the show, which was unheard of, and he basically says, I'm doing the show 60 minutes, and NBC had to cave. I mean, he was their meal ticket. It was him and Bob Hope in the Today Show, where that was NBC.
He didn't have leverage until he did.
Yeah, but when he did, I mean, Joanne, it was the AFTRA strike was going on in 1967, and Johnny alleged that they broke a contract with him, NBC, by airing reruns, and he refused for 2 months or 3 months. He was holed up in his apartment and went down to Fort Lauderdale. NBC signed Bob Newhart to a deal, and it was basically determined if Carson didn't come back, Newhart would be the host of The Tonight Show, and that was really Joanne. Joanne is like, Johnny, do this, and it really worked, but she was the architect. I mean, Johnny at this point he couldn't fire certain people on his staff. For example, he really did not want, for a long time, he did not want Skitch Henderson, but he had no say in it whatsoever. I mean, he did put his foot down and said, I want my brother to be the director, but yeah, NBC definitely was running the show in the beginning.
You mentioned Bob Newhart. Bob Newhart, before he got his sitcom with Suzanne Pleshette in 1972, he was one of many. He was on the short list of people who would sit in for Johnny for a week or a day or sometimes a couple of days when Johnny would take time off. Or when he was flying to Vegas at the Sahara. One of the fun things for me to learn was the way the writers of the monologue would approach the monologue if Johnny was hosting versus if a guest host was hosting, and
very different.
And it's like David Letterman picked up on this whether he realized it or not, because the first time he guest hosted the show, he felt that not that they didn't work hard, but they didn't work quite as hard for a guest host as they did for Johnny.
Oh, absolutely. Orson Bean told me that it was basically Johnny leftovers. And, some of the guest hosts were really demanding about Joan Rivers would ask for a lot of material and never use it, and the writers just theorized that they would just use those jokes. She would use their jokes in Vegas. Believe it or not, and I was really surprised about this, Mulholland Berry, who were Johnny Carson's prize monologue writers, Mike Berry and Jim Mulholland, they told me that Bob Newhart was the most difficult guest host because he wanted them to write full-out Bob Newhart routines, and then one of them at least he did in Vegas without any attribution, any payment. But yeah, there were definitely certain guest hosts that they liked having there. But Jerry Lewis was actually usually on his best behavior. There were a couple times where the writers, one time in Mississippi and a bunch of places were going to boycott Lewis for a joke that he did, and he blamed the writers. But for the most part, it was almost like a day off when the guest hosts were there for the writers.
Orson Bean was one of the people that Mark talked to. Bob Uecker was one of the people that Mark talked to. There's another one. Lonnie Anderson was someone that Mark talked to, and he captures their stories in both the Carson Podcast and his new book, Love Johnny Carson, available wherever books are sold through Dutton Books. We were talking about this before we started recording. There's a sense of fortune that you were able to talk to so many of these people and get their stories down before they passed.
I mean, you've done the same. I mean, I feel so grateful to sit down with them. It never occurred to me that some of these people as young as Bob Saget would be gone from us, or Bob Einstein. But Lonnie Anderson was really special to sit down with because, I mean, Carson did some really kind things. I mean, he was producing a show that she was on with Linda Carter, and they were filming in San Francisco, and Lonnie Anderson's mom was dying of cancer, and Johnny found out about it and gave Lonnie Anderson his private plane to get back and forth, and that was quintessential Johnny. And then when Burt Reynolds in the late 80s, there were rumors that he had AIDS, and all these people, a lot of his friends left him and they were not loyal to him. Lonnie said Johnny was always there during that difficult time for Burt Reynolds. When they adopted a child, Johnny was there. And the loyalty was the thing that people told me over and over again was the most important thing to Johnny. He would do anything they said for a friend and be so loyal, but he expected it back. And when somebody betrayed him, his heart was broken.
Yeah, look, one of the many, all of us who are human, who are living, breathing human beings are walking contradictions, we try to follow certain rules, but we're not always perfect, and Johnny was no exception. And yes, he could hold grudges.
Yes.
And you give many examples of that throughout the pages of Love Johnny Carson, Mark. But one thing that he was consistent on, but this is both in terms of his approach to hosting the show and in many respects his approach to philanthropy, which you just touched on with Burt Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson, is that he never made it about himself. He never, if he made a donation, he didn't pronounce it. He was very old school about that. It was about the cause.
He wanted it to be anonymous. There's some celebrities that'll put out press releases when they do charity. Johnny just was not like that. I mean, it was a couple of years after he passed that the public found out that he had left $180 million, and the foundation still pays out, the Johnny Carson Foundation. And, he would just pull out, especially in retirement, he would just pull out his checkbook when he read something in the paper and somebody was in need, or anybody in Nebraska needed something, or Malibu. The nursing home would just, they would ask for a piano, and Johnny would send the most beautiful piano and just send me the bill. That was definitely Johnny. His generosity was something that I really wanted to explore. I talked to comedians that would tell me during the commercial breaks, Johnny would give them advice on how to punch up the material. And it was Christmas morning for a comedian to get joke suggestions by Johnny Carson. George Lopez went on the show and debuted, and Johnny gave him after the show a suggestion on a joke. And George Lopez said that he tried it out then at a club, and Johnny was absolutely right. But he definitely, his rule, Peter LaSalle, his producer, told me, was that my goal is to make my guest look good. The first half hour was Johnny, the monologue, and then you have the comedy piece. And then it was let my guest shine. And if it's a comedian, I don't need to try to one-up them like some hosts do and make it about me. He was secure enough to just let them shine.
Love Johnny Carson by Mark Malkoff, available wherever books are sold through Dutton Books. You can also find it Amazon.com, where books are sold online. Mark, we'll be back next week for part 2 of our conversation. Among other things, we'll take a deep dive into the backstory, one of the most famous moments in the history of the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, the night when Johnny got upset at Don Rickles when he found out that Rickles had broken his cigarette box, one of the souvenirs from when he did the show in New York, and how Johnny responded by walking into a live taping of Rickles' show, CPO Sharkey, right across the hall. Part 2 of our conversation with Mark Malkoff next week on TV Confidential.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
If you've got an ED problem, now you can get generic or herbal blue pills for as little as $2 a pill from Steelman Pills.
800-932-2613, 800-932-2613.
Ed Robertson thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode.
Hi, this is Les Adam, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson with a reminder that the next edition of TV Confidential will premiere next week on this station at the usual time. We'll take part 2 of our conversation with Mark Malkoff, author of Love Johnny Carson. Plus, we'll welcome Cam Clark. Cam Clark, one of the busiest voice actors in the entertainment industry and the author of Now They're All Here, A History the King family. In the meantime, Love Johnny Carson, available wherever books are sold through Dutton Books as well as Amazon.com. Also a reminder that a limited number of printed copies of On the Run, the script for the final episode of The Bionic Woman, autographed by Lindsay Wagner, is available for pre-order right now at bionic50.com. Bionic50.com. You can also schedule a one-on-one video chat with Lindsay Wagner where you can share your memories of watching The Bionic Woman. There are also some newly released autographed photos of Lindsay Wagner as Jamie Summers. All these items available at bionic50.com. Bionic50.com. Physical items will be mailed out later in January. If you want to book a video chat with Lindsay Wagner, the chat will be held in February. Deadline for all orders, February 28, 2026. Details and more information, bionic50.com, bionic50.com. Ed Robertson, Dr. Tony Figueroa, Donna Allenfield Grace, and Susan Silver. Thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time on TV Confidential.